Welcome back to Face the Nation. I'm John Dickerson. Joining us now from the U.S. Embassy in Kabul, Afghanistan, is Republican Senators John McCain and Lindsey Graham. The distance is causing a bit of a delay, but thank you, Senators, for being with us. And Senator Graham, I want to start with you. The Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, has said she'll accept the FBI determination on Hillary Clinton's email server, whatever it is. Do you feel the same way?
Yes.
Senator McCain, I'll start with you then on the question of terrorism in Istanbul, Bangladesh, overnight in Iraq. What, to this diverse set of terrorist challenges, should the U.S. policy response be?
The U.S. response should have been a long time ago not to withdraw everybody from Iraq, and now the president is on the verge of doing the same thing here in Afghanistan, where things are not going well, and he's insisting on cutting the numbers in half while the situation deteriorates. But what he should have done was to remain in Iraq, and while Al-Qaeda went to Syria, became ISIS, and now we see what we are seeing. What we need to do is go to Raqqa and kill them, and you can do that with 10,000 of 100,000 person contingent using American capabilities. Go take them out of Raqqa, where they are now basing most of these, or at least some of these attacks, and then get into the long ideological struggle to defeat this metastasizing evil that is afflicting all of the Middle East and parts of the world.
Senator Graham, Secretary of State John Kerry reiterated again this week that he thinks this uptick in violence is related to the pressure that is being put on Daesh or ISIS, and he says it's a sign that they're being put into a corner. Do you buy that?
Well, you know, we have made progress on the ground in Iraq and Syria, but there is no strategy to replace Assad. And if Assad stays in power in Syria, the war in Syria never ends, and you can't stabilize Iraq. But the one thing I want people to know, if you forget about Afghanistan, you do so at your own peril. This is where 9/11 originated. The president's about to make the most consequential decision of his presidency in a long time about troop levels. Mr. President, this time around, accept sound military advice, lead the 9,800, make it conditions-based, and let the next president, whoever he or she may be, deal with Afghanistan. Please do not cut these troop levels in half. If you do, Afghanistan's going to become Iraq very quickly.
And have rules of engagement that we can utilize the full use of American military power.
Senator McCain, on that Afghanistan question, the situation there, by some reports, is quite dire. The unity government is in a very shaky state, and the Taliban is making advances. For an American public that has seen 15 plus years of war in Afghanistan, leaving the troops there, it might feel like just throwing good after bad.
Well, then that means we have forgotten the lesson of 9/11, and that is that where those attacks came from, and that was a base here in Afghanistan. We cannot afford to consign Afghanistan to that status again. And of course, if we leave and these forces take over, then there will be further attacks on the United States of America. By the way, there's going to be further attacks on the United States of America as long as they have a base in Syria, but then they'll have another base in Afghanistan.
Senator Graham, I want to ask you about Turkey. A year ago, a lot of analysts would say that Turkey was sort of turning a blind eye to ISIS. A lot of the fighters went through, almost all of them were going through Turkey, and that Turkey was an enabler, as one person put it. Where now do you think Turkey is in terms of the fight against ISIS?
Moving in the right direction. I want to give the administration credit for getting Turkey more on board. But this attack you saw in Turkey is just a symptom of a greater problem. But Turkey was antagonistic toward Israel. Now we have a new relationship between Turkey and Israel, so that's a good sign. But I can only tell you that in Afghanistan, Daesh or ISIL is actually growing in capability. So Turkey coming to the fight will help us in Syria and Iraq. But we don't have a strategy to destroy ISIL. The next president will have to deal with that. What we're doing in Syria is buying time. President Obama is passing this on to the next president. And I hope to God we don't get hit in the United States from an attack planned in Syria like you saw in Turkey. And I'm afraid that's going to happen if we don't speed up the demise of ISIL.
Senator McCain, Senator Graham just mentioned the next president. We've talked about some pretty complex issues here which will face that next president. Would Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton be better in handling those issues?
I don't think either one of them have displayed what I think is the necessary strategy and outlook, the planning that and reliance on our military leaders that will be necessary to succeed. I hope that whichever one is president, that they would call in the David Petraeuses and Robert Fords and Ryan Crockers and those individuals, both military and State Department diplomats who succeeded in Iraq before the president gave it all away, who know what we need to do to defeat this threat, both militarily and diplomatically in other ways. And either one of them should call them in and do what they recommend, and that way we can still succeed, because America is still the strongest nation on earth.
If I may add, John.
Hold on, let me just follow up.
John, I think both Clinton. Sorry.
Senator McCain, you mentioned a number of advisors there. I noticed that a number of your advisors, Randy Schuneman, Kissinger, Armitage, Crystal, Kagan, James Woolsey, have all either had serious questions about Trump or are openly against him. And I wondered why you're supporting Donald Trump, given your reservations and the reservations of the people you trust.
Well, as I've said, I would support the nominee of the party. I have strong disagreements, and we've just been through several of them. And that's my position.
All right. And Senator Graham, as a final thing here, would you just add what you were planning to before the time delay got in our way?
I think Clinton and Trump both would have a conditions-based withdrawal in Afghanistan. When it comes to Syria, when Trump says it's okay for Assad to stay, that tells me he has no idea what that means for the region. Israel is in great threat from Iran. Iran is arming Hezbollah with precision-guided missiles. The trip from Israel was very unnerving, to say the least. So the Syrian civil war is having an effect throughout the region. Mr. Trump, when you said Assad should stay, you need to rethink that. As to Secretary Clinton, she says she wants a no-fly zone in Syria. That is a great step in the right direction.
All right, Senators, thank you so much for being with us. Happy 4th of July, and we'll be right back with our 4th of July book panel. This 4th of July weekend, we thought we'd delve into the history of the past presidents and a great military leader. Joining us to discuss their biographies are Annette Gordon-Reed and Peter Onuf, authors of Most Blessed of the Patriarchs, Thomas Jefferson and the Empire of the Imagination. Gene Edward Smith, author of Bush. Douglas Brinkley, author of Rightful Heritage, Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the Land of America. And Arthur Herman, author of Douglas MacArthur, American Warrior. Annette, let me start with you. The complexity of these people that all of you have written about. Thomas Jefferson seems to have the most complexity, and people are always kind of shifting and changing their positions about him. Just start for me, if you would, with the complexities of Thomas Jefferson and how we should think about them, about him, but then also historical figures in general.
Well, Duma Malone, who's the great Jefferson biographer, described him as 6 or 7 men rolled into one. And when you have that kind of description, I think is apt, it gives a lot for people to think about. He was a multifaceted person, a statesman, a farmer, a plantation owner, a slave owner, a person who wrote the creed, the American creed, all men are created equal. So once you have that, the slave owning and also the American creed, talking about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it automatically brings the complexity that people find fascinating.
Arthur Herman MacArthur, you say he was the last American hero. And so he also, great, extraordinary risk-taking victories and failures, incredible vanity. Talk about, I mean, could that kind of a hero exist anymore? How did it work that he had both such upside and potential downside?
Great question. I think part of what you have to realize about him is that the heroic image was to a large degree self-crafted. He's very much, we have to remember, a figure almost from the 19th century who we should really think about in the way we would think about a Robert E. Lee, the way we would talk about a George Armstrong Custer, the way he crafts his trademark image, iconic image with the corncob pipe and the hat and the Ray-Ban sunglasses. But he's also somebody who's, I think, and maybe this is the true for everybody that we've been writing about, is that he occupies no fixed point in sort of the American historical imagination. He's always being seen in different lights and new ways, often reviled, often somebody who's celebrated and revered, And this is part of MacArthur's, I think, fascination for a biographer, is how you, again, and I like the way you put that, how you bring all the men that he embodies together into a single three-dimensional portrait. I hope that's what I've done with this book, and I think for MacArthur it's one that's been long overdue, frankly.
Makes it fun.
It makes it interesting.
FDR was sometimes two different people between two different consecutive meetings. I mean, wasn't that part of his genius a little bit, is that he was kind of, everybody thought he was on their side?
Yeah, they famously, FDR said, "I'm a juggler. Nobody knows what my left hand is doing compared to my right hand." He didn't even know sometimes. Anybody who took a meeting with FDR came out thinking they got what they wanted, only to find out they really didn't. He was an extraordinary politician. But the key to understanding FDR, in my view, is the Hudson River Valley, and it's a sanctified landscape, and it's where he was born, where he lived his whole life, and he's buried there in Hyde Park, New York. And he always had a home place, like Thomas Jefferson, that he could go to and get his energies, refurbished from going over there. Eleanor Roosevelt famously said, "People think my husband's on an intellectual, but the truth is he has a map mind." He knew every county, every back road, every creek, not just in New York State, but all over America. And that's how he was able to do the WPA and the Civilian Conservation Corps, planting trees and saving historic sites and worrying about soil erosion and the Dust Bowl. We think of the Great Depression as the stock market crash. He saw it as about the rejuvenation of the farmers and the landscapes of America.
Gene Edward Smith, you've written about a lot of presidents, and you write very critically of George W. Bush and his decision making. The current president, Barack Obama, people say he doesn't make decisions fast enough. In all the presidents you've studied, from Grant to FDR to Bush, talk about the decision-making quality of a president. What makes a good decision-making president, and what makes one that's not so good?
Well, I think a good decision-making quality is if a president looks at all sides of an issue, and George W. Bush did not. George W. Bush came to office with a certain fixed view, and became the decider. Now George Bush was the decider. It wasn't Cheney, and it wasn't the underlings in the White House. It's George Bush who was making the decisions. And Bush came to office believing that he was God's agent here on earth. And when you believe that, you can get into trouble.
Arthur Herman MacArthur was also pretty sure what he believed. and he got into some real clashes with presidents.
Yes, and he wouldn't be put off by the comparisons with God either. It didn't bother him in any way as a figure. He is, and one of the reasons I have the subtitle American Warrior is he's not just at war with America's foes, he's also at war with his own leadership, including in the Army, including three presidents, Hoover, Roosevelt, and Truman. And it's an amazing career when you think about it, because considering his enormous rise within his chosen profession, the U.S. Army, the fact that he's never able to restrain himself from telling his superiors when they're wrong, and he thinks they're wrong, and that he is, grating nerves right. It's an amazing career. I mean, basically, he's driving his career through the U.S. Army with the parking brake on. And the fact that he's able to achieve the kinds of things he did, to be a major, decisive commander in three wars, right. World War I, World War II, and Korea, is really a tribute, I think, to the man's ability, but also, I think, to the power of his vision.
We're going to get back to Jefferson in a second.
But to his point, FDR couldn't stand Douglas MacArthur, but he needed Douglas MacArthur.
That's right.
And just 6 days before FDR died on April 12, 1945, he made MacArthur the head of the Pacific Command. And it was one of the great things that Franklin Roosevelt did, meaning he tolerated somebody that annoyed him because MacArthur was going to win the campaign against Japan in the Pacific Theater.
All right, we're going to pause right there. We're going to be back with our authors in a moment, but first this break. And we're back with more from our authors. Peter, I don't know if I want to start with you, the point that Annette was making about Jefferson and slavery,
right.
Going to this point about contradiction. Where was Jefferson actually on slavery? I mean, he owned slaves, and then, of course, he wrote about the freedom of men. So what are we to think?
Right. Well, he thought that slavery was a radical injustice that must, in the fullness of time, be rectified. And his plan for that was that justice would be done by emancipating the slaves. So far, so good, we like that. But then expatriating them, sending them to a country of their own. The hard truth that we don't like to face is that the nation that Jefferson was creating was a white nation. It didn't mean he didn't respect the human rights, the natural rights of his enslaved people, but those could only be fulfilled elsewhere. And then they could become an independent people, a free and independent people. It's ironic that he uses the language of the Declaration of Independence when he talks about the ultimate freedom of slaves, but he says, we will create them, send them elsewhere and create them into a free and independent people. In other words, where the war for independence is an assertion of nationhood, then nationhood for enslaved people would be asserted by their white masters.
Yes. And he did not believe, as this suggests, that there could be a multiracial country. He didn't have the confidence that whites and blacks could live together without conflict. And of course, that is the thing that we're trying to do now, and that's the problem that we have with them.
Gene Edward Smith, I want to go doing a big time shift here, but I want to go back to this question of presidents and generals, because again, you've written about presidents and generals who became presidents. George Bush's relationship to his military, building off of what we were saying about MacArthur and FDR, what was the relationship between Bush and the military?
George Bush was commander-in-chief, and he felt very definitely that he was commander-in-chief, and this was a superior subordinate relationship. And I think it's fair to say that the first two chairmen of the Joint Chiefs and George Bush really didn't get along. I don't think most Americans realize it, but the Joint Chiefs are no longer really in the battle chain of command. It goes from the President to the Secretary of Defense to the area commander. And the Joint Chiefs, after the Goldwater-Nichols Act in 1986, are no longer in the chain of command. But they are the Joint Chiefs. They do command the Army. And so it's a very complicated situation. That's all true except for General Petraeus. I think that Petraeus and Bush got along very nicely.
Douglas, the FDR, what he did with the Conservation Corps, how much resistance was there? When we think about Barack Obama, remember the shovel-ready projects? It was the stimulus so hard for him to pass. Conservation as an idea at the time as stimulus, how hard was that for FDR to do?
Well, he inherited the conservation mantle from his fifth cousin, Theodore Roosevelt, so it was in the family bloodstream. And then he was governor of New York State, FDR, in 1928, won again in 30, and did kind of putting unemployed tree armies to work for the Depression, planning in New York State. He took that program. It was FDR's pet program, the CCC. Just weeks after his famous historic, we have nothing to fear inaugural, he ended up paying $1 a day to young men all over, saving our state parks, national parks, historic sites. He would push forward things like bringing the mall here, came into the National Park Service, the White House and all into it. In fact, pushed forward the Jefferson Memorial, but the CCC generation's been dying off. Many are in their 90s now, but they've all left diaries and things that I was able to tap into. They planted almost 3 billion trees from 1933 to 1942. Then Congress defunded the CCC, and it was one of our most successful programs. And there's a call now, can we do something for our young people? Is there a new CCC? But it's hard because they were in, they had bugle call, they had uniforms on, they did. But this 4th of July, if you go to Zion or Olympic or Channel Islands or Mammoth Cave, any of these parks, Everglades, Smokies, the CCC has a big role in making it tourist ready.
And they couldn't have done it without Douglas MacArthur.
Yes.
Because Roosevelt, they needed somebody who could run the training camps for these young men and who would know something about organization and logistics with it. And there were a lot in the Army when Roosevelt turned to the War Department to get them to help. There were a lot of senators that said, we're not going to waste our time with this kind of nonsense. And MacArthur said no. He said, this is the perfect opportunity. In a period of time in which Army budgets have been slashed, and our prestige in the nation's at a low ebb, this is the way to prove what we can do. Sometimes people say the CCC, that was a kind of important requisite for the U.S. mobilization in World War II. That's not quite accurate, but it did help U.S. Army officers and reserve and ROT officers learn the ropes about commanding large numbers of young men, many of them unwilling young men, to work together and to train and to perform these kinds of very, very complicated logistical tasks all over the country.
Jefferson believed in the ultimate progress of the American experiment, but went through some dark times where that experiment looked in danger. What would he say now, where everybody looks at the system and says, "Oh, it's a mess"? Would he have some? How did he retain faith in the evolution of things, even in the darkest of times?
Well, because he had a scientific bent. He sort of extrapolated from progress in science to progress in everyday life. What he would say about now, people always ask me that, channeling Jefferson. I think he would be a little bit concerned about the sort of anti-intellectualism that exists in the country today, and the sort of inward looking. I mean, he certainly thought we shouldn't be involved in foreign entanglements, but he did think that America should engage the world. So I think he might be a little bit concerned about what is going on at this particular moment.
I think he'd say also that maybe we know too much and we're disenchanted and disillusioned. It's hard to believe in progress when we think we know everything, and the things that are emerging now are frightening to us. That belief in progress is based on the few things you could know and then build on. And I think his relationship to nature is crucial. He thinks it's immanent in nature that God has a plan and it will work out. And that kind of sense of a providential destiny that combines, you might say, natural religion and science into this faith in the future.
That was FDR had that too.
Yeah, the earth belongs to the living.
I'm going to have to pause this here. We're going to carry on the conversation online on the Face the Nation website. Thank you all of you for being here and for the continued conversation we'll have. But for the moment, that's it for us. We'll be right back.
Thank you.
We pay tribute this morning to Nobel Prize-winning author and Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel. The human rights activist lost his entire family in concentration camps and devoted his life to the message that the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. He promoted Holocaust education and protested genocide around the world. Wiesel was 87 years old. That's it for us today. Thanks for watching. Have a very happy 4th of July. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm John Dickerson.